Shalom, and welcome back to Bnei Noach Academy, Thoughts on the Torah. Please remember to hit the like button, to subscribe, and most importantly, to share this insight and inspiration with friends and family. So you look in the book of Numbers, chapter 20, verse 10. This is the story when they complained about water, and this is at the end of the 40 years. And, they've gotten accustomed to it. You can say, in a sense, they took it for granted. God provided for 40 years. It's something you just get used to and you just expect it to happen. I mean, you don't expect the sun not to come up in the morning. And also, to their credit, let's not bash them. The people were quite upset. They were thirsty. And in fact, it says thirst is one of the most painful ways to die. They're hydrated. They have little children. People tend to care about their children. And, it gets them really all riled up. It's not so much about themselves, but about the children not having what the children need. And thus, the people all ganged up on Moses. And finally, when Moses goes out there, initially, he didn't recognize that stone because it was a stone like all stones. I mean, a stone is a stone. It doesn't have a specific marking. It doesn't have any, identification means. And therefore, he didn't recognize it. And first, initially, he spoke to one stone. Nothing happened because it wasn't the right stone. Because God didn't say to him, speak to a stone. He said to him and Aaron, speak to the stone. So they had to identify that original stone, which was giving the water for all these 40 years or so. Finally, the Jews get so upset, and some started to complain and even mock. And they were like, yeah, right. Okay, now you're going to do this. And now remember, what is their point of reference? Whether they were personally there 40 years ago, maybe albeit as small children, as youngsters, or maybe they heard from their parents. But their point of reference was, and again, they came to take it for granted, is that Moses raises his staff and brings it down on the stone, and stone gives water. But speaking to a stone didn't make sense to them, especially considering what they see before them. Moses is speaking to the stone, nothing's happening. So they're like, give it up. And they started to complain and to pester him. And Moses, who was so certain that if God said to him, speak to the stone and the water will come out, initially he had a lot of patience. He was ready to speak to every stone until he till he catches up with the right stone, the correct one, and the water will start to come. He had no doubt about it. But when they started to pester him, when they started to become obnoxious, Moses suddenly lost his cool and he became angry with them. And that's when he said to them, listen here, rebels. And the moment he became angry, and he says, from this stone shall I bring out water? Because they started pointing, they said, hey, why don't you try that stone? Why don't you try that stone? In a very mocking way. And that's when Moses, when he lost his cool and he became angry, that's when he did what he did. He raised the staff and hit the stone. But guess what? At this point, the stone that he hit was the correct stone. Had he spoken to the stone, it would have given the water and it would have all been over. The sages tell us that although who are we to judge Moses? I mean, how can anybody even come to his ankles in piety, in devotion to God? But still, like everything else in the Torah, it's there to teach us how to live our lives. It's there to teach us a lesson. The sages tell us that here you can see even someone as great as Moses, when he became angry, anger overtook him and caused him to err and caused him to make a mistake that cost him and his brother dearly. They could now not enter the land of Israel. They're going to have to pass away and remain in the desert until the end of days when the Messiah comes, when Mashiach arrives. This tells us that anger is terrible. In fact, the sages in the Talmud tell us they equate one who gets angry as if it's, so to speak, like one is worshiping idols. Like it says, Kol hakoes keilu oved avodah zarah. One who gets angry is as if he's worshiping an idol. What does that mean? That means that, on the surface, that anger is terrible. It's abhorrent. Stay away from it, just like you stay away from idolatry. But it also is a deeper meaning, which makes sense. What is the association with idolatry? You notice it doesn't say one who gets angry is like one who murders or takes a life, which if you're just telling the severity of thing, that would be very severe. That is the most severe thing. Why equate it to idolatry, to serving an idol, worshiping an idol, that is? The answer is because essentially what is worshiping an idol? What is behind it? Well, Maimonides explains to us how the initial error, the evolution of idolatry, how it began. Where was that, quote, big bang of idolatry? Well, what happened was there were many people that instead of just using their faith, we're talking about now in the early generations of mankind, instead of using their faith, they also started to try to apply their human intellect. And they started to reason, and they started to rationalize. And they then came to a conclusion, God is so big. God is beyond this world, which is true in a sense. It is true. But their conclusion, based on this truth, was that God doesn't get involved with the world. And God left the world up to the discretion of intermediaries. And therefore, if we worship those intermediaries, then we will get all the goodies that we need. Then we'll get the good life that we desire. Of course, we know that's not true. God is directly involved, as we know. One of the most important tenets of our faith is divine providence. Everything happens with God's direct intervention. However, they seem to associate the control of the world to God and to another power, so to speak. So when someone gets angry, what does that mean? Something happened to you. Someone did something to you. Well, if you get angry at that person, what that means is that you're associating what just happened to you. The terrible thing that just occurred to you, you're associating with that person. In other words, that person is solely to blame, or that thing is solely to take responsibility for what just happened to you, forgetting that it really came from God. That person just served as an agent, albeit that person could have made a bad decision to become God's agent. But remember, had God decided that this has to happen to you for whatever his infinite wisdom decided so, for whatever reason that is, but God could have found so many other agents to make you suffer this pain, to make you incur this discomfort. Therefore, when you get angry, it's comparable to worshiping idols, because you're kind of associating the control of this world and what happens to you to more than just God himself, but to other things in between, to intermediaries. However, I should note, the sages tell us that when it comes to matters of holiness, that means when you see people doing the wrong thing and going against God's will, then there needs to be a certain level of anger. I say a certain level, a certain measure of anger, not full-fledged anger, because anger is not healthy, not physically, not spiritually, but at least to appear as if you're upset, considering that may be effective in putting a fear into the people, in making them a little more apprehensive from going against God's will. But otherwise, anger is something that needs to be pushed away as best and as much as possible, because it's a terrible, terrible thing, as we see here.